Christmas!
The maniac, who terrorized California in the 1960s, called himself the Zodiac in his letters to the press, and every citizen of the country shuddered for the next message from the serial killer. Why the police failed to identify the Zodiac even more than 60 years later, and what were the perpetrators' motives? Little was known about one of the most famous serial killers in U.S. history for a long time. For 50 years after the completion of a series of terrible crimes, the police could not name the real name of the brutal killer, nor describe his appearance, and even the maniac chose his pseudonym for himself by sending a letter to one of the California newspapers. Different methods of murder, his own label, secret signs and encrypted messages. The Zodiac case remained one of the most mysterious crimes in America, but on October 6, 2021, a group of private detectives announced that the identity of the maniac had become known. The story of the Zodiac begins on December 20, 1968. It was on that day that the serial killer committed his first crime and laid the foundation for a protracted investigation that haunted all U.S. police officers for many years. The first victims of the criminal were two people, a couple in love, who went on their first date to the picturesque Herman Lake in the town of Vallejo. However, the romantic evening ended tragically. As soon as night fell, an unknown person with a pistol in his hand approached the car of 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Faraday. The killer told the young people to leave the car, after which the Zodiac shot David, and then caught up and killed Betty. The bodies of the lovers were discovered shortly after the murder, but the police did not have a single lead to catch the perpetrator. The next step of the Zodiac was the murder of Darlene Ferrin and Michael Maggio, who also decided to spend time alone near Herman Lake. On July 4, 1969, the lovers drove up to the Blue Rock Springs Park and stopped by the water. At about 2300 hours, a man approached the car and shot the young people with a Luger pistol 5 times, after which he fired 2 more control shots and fled the scene of the crime. The girl died immediately, and Michael, despite his injuries, managed to survive. It was this murder that led the police to the idea that a serial killer was operating in the city. By that time there were already 4 victims on his account, and similar handwriting and the weapon of the crime indicated that the same person killed in both cases. By the way, after a few hours, the guesses of the policemen were confirmed. At about 1 a.m., the Vallejo Police Department received an anonymous call. The person on the other end of the line reported the murder of 2 young people in the park, and also said that he was taking responsibility for this crime. The police immediately began to act. They managed to locate the phone, the machine from which the call was made. As it turns out, the killer made the call from the home of his victim, Darlene Ferrin. Also, a conversation with the criminal was recorded at the police station, and the dispatcher later noted that the caller's speech was as if prepared in advance, and the killer himself spoke very calmly, even monotonously. Was a mystery, and no new evidence could be found. However, on July 31st of the same year, the maniac himself decided to remind himself. That day, the editorial offices of 3 publications, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner, received 3 frightening messages that contained information about murders in cars. The author of the letters, who identified himself as Zodiac, stated that he was the one responsible for these crimes. In addition, all 3 messages contained encrypted fragments, in which, according to the maniac, his name was hidden. The Zodiac demanded that publications publish his letters no later than August 1st, otherwise he threatened to kill at least 12 people. Together with the city's police department, the newspapers decided to agree to the terms of the Zodiac, and on the appointed day, the city shuddered from the killer's messages on the front pages of popular publications. 6 days later, the Zodiac sent another letter in which he wrote that he was now in control of the situation, and also said that he was waiting for a film to be made about him. Dear editor, the Zodiac is speaking to you. I'm with you again. Tell Herb Cohen, American producer, that I'm back. I've always been here. This Tashi, San Francisco Police Department Inspector Dave Tashi, is good, but he'll soon get tired of chasing me. I'm waiting for a good movie about me. Who will play me? I control events. Sincerely yours, sign of a cross in a circle, guess. The maniac signed his messages with an unusual sign, a small circle in which there was a cross. The meaning of this signature is also still unknown, but some experts believe that this is the logo of the famous American company Zodiac, which inspired the killer. By the way, the police failed to decipher any of the 3 cryptograms that Zodiac sent with the first 3 letters. But it was possible for 2 residents of the city, mathematics teacher Donald Garden and his wife Betty. On August 8, a married couple published transcripts of 2 messages from a maniac, which said that he likes to kill people, and his victims will become his slaves in the afterlife. In the autumn of that year, the Zodiac struck the next blow near Berryessa Lake in Napa. He attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia and Shepard. The killer, armed with a gun and a knife, told the couple that he was an escaped criminal and was going to steal their car. However, after the Zodiac tied up Brian and Cecilia, he dealt with them in cold blood. After that, the maniac depicted a circle crossed out with a cross on the car of his victims and disappeared. Brian Hartnell managed to survive, but his lover died on the way to the hospital. The police interrogated the survivor and, from his words, made an approximate sketch of the criminal. A few hours after the crime, the Zodiac called the police department and told about what he had done. The police were able to locate the payphone from which the call was made, but this did nothing to help the investigation. True, Police Department Officer Ken Narlow, who was put in charge of the investigation, compiled a psychological profile of the serial killer and described his main characteristics, among which was his attraction to water bodies. All crimes were committed near water bodies, as well as his choice of victims, each since the offender deliberately chose the couple who preferred to retire in their car. In addition, Narlow noted a different choice of weapons, which was uncharacteristic of the typical image of a maniac. On October 11, 1969, the Zodiac committed his last proven murder, which this time was different from the previous ones. On that day, the victim of the crime of the Zodiac was the taxi driver Paul Stein, whom the maniac shot with a Luger, stole his wallet and cut off a small piece of his shirt. This murder was witnessed by a group of teenagers who told the police that they saw a black man getting out of a taxi. The police combed the nearby neighborhoods, but on the way they met only one passerby, whose appearance did not match the description of the witnesses. A few hours later, the Zodiac called the police station, who decided to mock the officers. He said that immediately after the murder of the taxi driver, 2 policemen approached him and asked questions about the crime, but it did not even occur to them to suspect him. As it became clear from the words of the Zodiac, he was wearing a mask when he left the taxi driver's car, and therefore the teenagers in the dark mistook him for an African American. This monstrous omission led the entire police of the city into a state of shock, and the murderer, who was almost caught, hid for a while. True, the silence of the Zodiac did not last long. A few days later, he sent a letter to the editors of the Chronicle with a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, and also revealed several details of the crime that were known only to the police. After that, the killer, between 1969 and 1974, sent about 20 more letters, including a postcard with a cryptogram that could not be deciphered, a 7-page voluminous text where the Zodiac spoke about the murder of a taxi driver, as well as messages with a confession in another 36 murders, for which, by the way, he was not found guilty. In addition, some amateur detectives even suggested that the Zodiac was not one criminal, but a whole group of murderers who probably belonged to some kind of sect. A little later, one of the researchers put forward a version that the Zodiac was a member of the family sect, founded by Charles Manson. Unfortunately, all the versions put forward were not consistent, and after many years the brutal killer was never caught. All the evidence found and the surviving witnesses did not help the police advance in the investigation of the high-profile case. Perhaps this was due to the lack of modern technology at that time, and perhaps the criminal talent of the criminal himself. After 1974, letters from the Zodiac stopped coming, but the investigation continued for many more years, and in some U.S. districts the case is still not closed. Among the suspects were rapist Arthur Lee Allen, George Russell Tucker, Louis Joseph Myers, Jack Terrence, and George Hodel, the father of Detective Steve Hodel, who suspected his father of an equally high-profile crime, the murder of the Black Dahlia, and later stated that Hodel Sr. could well be a Zodiac. The sensational case attracted increased attention, and therefore it is not surprising that many works have been written about the mysterious story of a serial killer, and several large-scale films have been shot, including David Fincher's Zodiac, Don Siegel's Dirty Harry, Martin McDonough's 7 Psychopaths, and a lot others. Until yesterday, one of the most high-profile cases in American history was considered unsolved, still open in Napa County, according to police, but on October 6, a group of journalists, criminologists, and former detectives who call themselves the Casebreakers announced that the name of the maniac has finally been established. According to community members, painter Gary Francis Post was hiding under the mask of the Zodiac. It is noteworthy that the alleged disclosure of the case was led by an investigation into the death of a victim previously unrelated to the Zodiac personality. This is Sherry Jo Bates, who was killed in 1966 in Riverside. Her killer was never found, but evidence left at the crime scene led the Casebreakers to believe that the girl died at the hands of one of the most wanted criminals in the United States. The fact is that a watch smeared with paint was found near the body of the victim, as well as a characteristic boot mark, which had previously been found near other victims of the Zodiac. Digging a little deeper, the team found that there was a hospital near the scene of the crime, to which someone named Gary Francis Post was sent after a gunshot wound on the same day that the murder of Sherry Jo Bates was committed. Comparing other evidence, community members searched the house of the alleged maniac, who, by the way, died in 2018, and found pictures in his home, which clearly show scars that match the scars on the Zodiac identikit. Also in favor of the fact that it was Gary Francis Post who was hiding under the mask of an elusive maniac, say the watch found at the murder site of Sherry Jo Bates, they were smeared with paint, and Post worked all his life as a house painter, and the boot print. The fact is that a number of forensic scientists had previously claimed that the Zodiac's shoes resembled army boots. As it turns out, Gary Francis Post was an Air Force veteran and might well have had a similar pair of shoes. After discovering the evidence, the group spoke with the alleged killer's neighbors. Despite the fact that none of them could confirm or deny the Casebreakers' version, one of the local residents noted that Post always seemed strange to her and led a double life. At the moment, the FBI refrains from commenting, indicating that the case is still open, but most of those who followed the investigation are sure that the Casebreakers participants managed to take a huge step forward, and soon in the case of one of the most terrible maniacs, the United States will be put to rest.